those of you who follow my channel, you know that most of the videos I've published up to now have been tutorials. But on this occasion I'm going to do an equipment review, and I'm going to review the ZWO ASI2600MM Pro astrophotography camera. It's a new camera out fairly recently from ZWO. There's been a lot of excitement online about its capabilities, and so I couldn't resist it. I bought one, and I'd like to show you what comes in the box, tell you about its features and performance, and then I'm going to go take some photographs with it tonight and show you how they come out. So let's get started. So it comes in a very nicely packaged box, and we'll pop it out of there and see what we get. So in the box we get the camera itself. That comes in a very nice black and red padded bag with a nice zip top and the camera inside. So we'll take the camera out, and this is the camera. It's an extremely nice looking camera, as are all ZWO cameras I've ever handled. Really nice metallic cylindrical body with this lovely red, shiny red metallic finish. On the back of the camera we've got pretty much what you'd expect. You've got the fan grill, the DC power port, the USB 3 port, and then two handy USB 2 ports for things like guide camera and filter wheel. On the side are the usual vents for the cooling, and there's also this little black plug which I believe is what you pull out if you're going to replace the desiccant. Although I have the 1600mm Pro, and I've had that for a couple of years, and I've never needed to replace the desiccant in that. On the front, and this is different from the 1600, on the front is this tilt adapter, or tilt adjuster, sorry, and that's 5mm thick and is removable, and that's important when it comes to back focus. The sensor in this camera is 17.5mm from the front face when the tilt adapter is fitted. When it's removed, it's 12.5mm back, and you should watch out for that when you're thinking about the back focus for your imaging train, because some of the other ZWO cameras, like the 1600mm Pro, only have the sensor 6.5mm back from the front face compared with the 17.5 of this. So there's an 11mm difference. And an important thing there is that the 1600 comes with that 11mm M42 female to female ring that you can put on the front, which pretty much gives you then the same back focus and interface as this camera. The interface on this camera is an M42 female. It's M42 by 0.75, so it's otherwise known as T2. We'll just take that nice, very nice cover cap. Actually, it's got a nice little, see it red there, nice little rubber O-ring in it, which makes it seal very nicely, and that reveals the imaging window with the sensor beneath it. Now the sensor on this camera is the Sony IMX571, which is a backlit sensor, which essentially means that more of the light turns into signal and less of it is blocked by features of the sensor itself. The imaging window has got a dew heater on it, which you can control. You can turn that on or off. So if you're trying to save battery power and you have no risk of dew, you can turn that off. I have to say I've never had dew on the sensor window on my 1600mm Pro, but it's a nice feature to have anyway, in case that ever does happen. So the size of the sensor, well, it's an APS-C sensor, and it gives you 23.5 by 15.7mm. So the sensor diagonal is smaller than a full frame, obviously, but it's quite a bit bigger than the 1600mm Pro. At 23.5 by 15.7, that's a diagonal of 28.3mm. It's a 16-bit sensor, which is really fantastic. It gives you a really good dynamic range, and that results in a full well capacity of a very impressive 50,000 E, which is really, really good. That full resolution, the images come out at 6248 by 4176 pixels with a pixel size of 3.76 microns, which is almost identical to the 1600mm Pro. It's got two-stage cooling, and it can get the sensor down to about 35 degrees below ambient temperature. There's a 256 megabyte DDR3 data buffer, a USB 3 interface, and the sensor has extremely low read noise, 1.1 to 3.3 E. The frames per second is quite limited at full resolution. It's just 3.51 to be exact, frames per second at full resolution. Although it does improve as if you drop the resolution down up to 51.44 frames a second at the coarsest resolution of 320 by 240 pixels. Exposure range very good, 32 microseconds all the way up to 2000 seconds. The peak quantum efficiency is 91%. Now that's really good, but it is just the peak, and if you look at the graph, which I'll show you here, you can see that that happens around about the oxygen wavelength, and other wavelengths, in particular the hydrogen alpha wavelength, is quite a bit lower. The great thing about a lot of these ZWO camera sensors is that they have 0 amp glow, and that's a really good feature. Now you don't have to worry about whether your darks are of a high enough quality that you will fully calibrate out your amp glow, because there really isn't any. The camera weighs 700 grams and has a body diameter across this circle here of 90 millimeters. And in case you're wondering if that's smaller than the base of the Star Arizona Hyperstar that's used on the Celestron SCTs, yes it is. The base, certainly on the C11 Hyperstar, the base is 109 millimeters across, and this is 90, so it's smaller. So it won't block any extra light. And finally, the power consumption, 1.15 amps at 12 volts. So, but actually it says on the body DC 12 volts at 3 amps. So you really ought to allow for 3 amps when you're sizing your power supply for this camera. So let's go and put it on the telescope and take some pictures with it and see what they look like. So I've acquired 12 3-minute shots on each of the 3 narrowband channels, hydrogen alpha, sulfur and oxygen. Let's take a look at what the individual frames look like. So here is a hydrogen alpha frame. I'm just going to adjust the levels so that we can see what we've got. Let's just adjust the black level a bit more. Okay, so there's the hydrogen alpha, and then let's take a look at an oxygen frame. This is an oxygen frame. Seeing the detail there, and then a sulfur frame. Sulfur frame is quite a bit dimmer. So just adjusting the levels a bit, so you can see some of the detail starting to show there. So I then stacked those using the calibration frames and taken them into Photoshop. So here we are with the stack of the hydrogen alpha. So I'm just going to do a conversion to 16 bits per channel with equalized histogram and OK. All these shots incidentally were taken on an 8-inch Newtonian f4. It's the Skywatcher Quattro 8CF. So that's what the hydrogen alpha looks like. We'll just do a little levels adjustment on that just to get a little bit more contrast, so you can really see the detail that's available in that shot. Obviously the HA is the strongest on this particular target. So do the same thing on the oxygen. Switch it to 16 bits per channel and do a little bit of a levels adjustment. Okay, and then finally on the sulfur, 16-bit again, localizing the histogram and just do a little levels adjustment. I'm doing this very crudely. Obviously I would take a lot more care when I was actually processing the data. Just want to show you what this stack of 12 actually looks like. So there is, actually I'm just slightly zoomed in correctly. Yeah. Okay, so there is the hydrogen, the oxygen and the sulfur. So I've then taken that in much slower time and processed it all together. I've actually used star removal and then replacement to come up with this. So this is a Hubble palette image with the stars put back in. Suppress the stars quite a bit so we can really see the detail in the nebula, and in fact I can switch the stars off so you can see just the nebula on its own. And I'm really pleased with this. I think it really shows how good this camera is. And this is just 36 minutes of data on each of the filters, so that's a total of 108 minutes of data for this entire image. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions or feedback, and until next time, clear skies and thanks for watching. Bye bye.